On episode 36 of Confessions of a Marketer, we're back with Jacques van Niekerk, looking at Apple, Amazon, Google, and others, and dissecting some events in the news. Welcome back to Confessions of a Marketer. I'm Mark Reed Edwards. Today we have Jacques van Niekerk, Wonderman Data CEO, back in to chat about Amazon, Apple, and Google's points of view in all the chatter about privacy. We'll get to that chat in just a moment. We've got episodes on conversational marketing, doing a rebrand, telling stories with data, along with a collaboration I'm undertaking on innovation. We might launch a separate podcast for chats about that, hoping to squeeze in that pilot before the end of the year. It should be a lot of fun, so stay tuned. On to Jacques van Niekerk. Jacques and I have chatted a few times, mainly about GDPR and its effect on marketers. After the last episode, I rang him up to chat about some events we saw in the news, and we decided to commit the discussion to the hard drive and share it with you. Nice short chat about what's going on in privacy and what it means to marketers. Let's get to it. Jacques, welcome back.
Thank you, Mark.
So as a follow-up to our GDPR chat last time, I thought it would be interesting to take a look at some of the events in the news related to privacy. Amazon, in an article in Adweek, didn't shy away from saying that it's, looking to monetize the data it has collected for more than 2 decades. Of course, it sees that as a revenue opportunity, right? There's a lot to unpack there in that article, and that's kind of what you do best and why I asked you back. So what's up with Amazon?
Well, I think Amazon, as it relates to marketing and advertising, is a fascinating beast in its own right, because Amazon, without really trying, before they knew it, became quite a force to reckon with in the world of ad land, because their platform has so many users on it.
Right.
So ironically, they're actually playing catch up as it gets to being a friend of Madison Avenue and getting close to all the large media agencies and holding groups. But it feels a bit perverse to say that Amazon's playing catch up because they're so dominant in every other right. But I think what we're seeing is really, a very different approach to the marketplace. And a lot of what's driving this is really the advances in cloud-based computing. And Amazon, through AWS being so dominant in the cloud spectrum, I think is using the innovation and their scale in the cloud to think about how do they approach advertising and the monetization of data. And we're seeing different strategies from people like Google, and I think the use cases for marketers is really what's driving a lot of this. So I think what they're really saying is, can a cloud-based data sharing platform adhere to stricter guidelines, both from a kind of a brand safety perspective and specifically around consumer privacy. And, what we're seeing is that people like Amazon and Google, to an extent, are saying that if we manage data in our cloud-based environments, we can do so in a safer, more brand safe way with less data leakage around the fringes. And a lot of this basically means that we're going to have less pixel-based tracking or third-party cookie-based tracking. And it plays into the hands of the major platforms. And obviously, any marketer would want their brand to be in an environment where it's not next to any malicious content and do better kind of one-to-one marketing. And I think that is what Amazon is starting to play towards.
So on the other side of the coin, you've got Apple, and Apple is calling for GDPR-like legislation here in the U.S., which underscores the difference between the two business models, Apple's and Amazon's. What do you think is behind that?
Yeah, it's almost unheard of to hear a company come out and say they're in full support of comprehensive federal privacy laws. But I believe it's a strong position to take, but it's right for Apple's business model. I thought it was a stroke of genius when Tim Cook said, at Apple, the customer is not the product. So one has to respect their very clear view of this. But then again, it kind of suits their business model. They don't have a scaled content and media platform if you compare it to, let's say, Google and an Amazon. And I know that might sound strange, but if you were to compare YouTube or the Google Content Network or Amazon Video and even platforms like Twitch and Amazon's own e-commerce marketplace as compared to, let's say, Apple News or the Apple App Exchange, they're relatively small. So they have less to gain in a way by trying to monetize their data. And the others are just frankly much larger and bigger scaled platforms in that regard. So I think it absolutely is the right thing for Apple to do. But to be honest, it kind of suits Apple.
It's not as though Apple hasn't tried advertising, right? They've tried to do that, and it just hasn't really worked very well.
Yeah, and I think Apple will innovate in their own way, and you know, I believe that a lot of what they'll try and do will be more around services and value-added services, you know, and frankly, in subscriptions. You know, there's talk about Apple News becoming a subscription-based service soon. And they'll use their data to understand how that service and how kind of news content is being consumed, and probably try and innovate in that direction. You know, they've always taken this kind of premium position, whether it's for both their product and their service.
And that's kind of the iTunes model.
Exactly.
So there's another big player. You mentioned Google briefly. Maybe the biggest player in the advertising world. I don't have the figures in front of me, but that maybe I'm telling the truth there. So what's Google's position in all of this?
Yeah, I think Google, and probably to an extent, you know, Facebook, after everything that's happened at Facebook, but they've been a little bit quiet compared to the others right now. But I think Google really wants the industry to improve. You know, they realize that because they have such a large content network, and they work with a lot of publishers and advertisers and brands in the ecosystem, that they need to find new solutions. But the problem is Google, like Amazon, is saying, well, we can do it in our cloud-based environment and in our cloud-based platform, which is right, because we can innovate there, and maybe we can keep data more, you know, the safest way to keep data safe is just don't move it around, right? So they're saying we're not going to move consumer data around, but brand marketer, just tell us, come to us, and we'll tell you whether you've met your customers or converted your customers, which is really hard because it makes the whole industry a little bit lopsided, right? So there'll be an overdependence on the walled gardens. There's a lot of smaller media companies and publishers out there who will be left behind in a way. You know, recently Brian Lesser of Xandr, which is part of AT&T, actually put it quite eloquently. He said we need more communal gardens than we need walled gardens. You know, so I think we're seeing this kind of battle of the clouds starting to bleed into the marketing ecosystem, where Amazon and Google are definitely intimating that they can do better at advertising and targeting, but it has to be done within their ecosystem and within their cloud infrastructure. So I think that's the big trend that's busy playing out in front of us.
Yeah, and Facebook could consume an entire podcast episode, but you know, give me a couple of minutes on Facebook in light of, you know, events from the news in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think Facebook, where they've done amazing work, is working with brands and the creative community. And they've done that for a long time. And unfortunately, and we've talked about this before, I think they've underestimated the importance of customer data and how data is managed across this quite a broad spectrum of people, whether it's developers or kind of partners in their landscape. And they're making a massive effort to clean that all up and tighten that up. So it seems a little like they've closed ranks on that a bit, but I feel it's out of necessity that they have to do that. And unlike, and this, I think this is an interesting take on it, because unlike Amazon and Google, they don't have a enterprise cloud-based strategy, which is clearly what Amazon and Google are using to their advantage to build new solutions for marketers and advertisers. That leaves Facebook a little bit outside of that arena. And as we said, Apple's playing to their own strength, which is more about kind of products and services at a premium subscription level. So it will be very interesting to see what Facebook's next move is going to be. I mean, you know, the strength in things like WhatsApp and the strength in Instagram is carrying it forward. But it's going to be interesting to see what will happen if they start pushing advertising into WhatsApp, which, as we know, is on the card. So, you know, Facebook themselves have some interesting challenges and opportunities. It just seems to be a little bit different to where Amazon and Google's going at.
Right. It's a complex marketplace. That's what it seems to me. And any one decision will have an effect on other decisions. So it's kind of like a bit of a dominoes, right?
It is. And I do think it's strange, Marcus, in a way there is a bit of maturity in the digital publishing and social media space. And I think if we think about the next wave of applications that's coming our way, advances in big data, machine learning, and artificial intelligence, it will open up a whole new set of questions around data ethics and privacy. So it's almost like the whole industry says right now, we need better standards.
Yeah.
And that's why you're almost seeing people turning to privacy laws and to the legislators, because there's a little bit of catch up that needs to happen in terms of kind of standards around customer data. And we're seeing a huge growth in things like customer data platforms and marketers taking their first party data strategies more seriously. But it is, you're right, because at one level there's a bit of maturity, but then there's this whole new wave of applications happening and a whole shift in kind of media landscape, whether it's the big cloud platforms or the way that the telco companies and the content companies are merging.
It just seems like we're maybe at the beginning of a significant shift. Do you agree with that?
I would agree. And, we know about the California privacy legislation. It's actually happening in a couple of other countries. We're seeing the same thing. So I think it's a big shift. I don't think Tim Cook's words are going to fall on deaf ears. I think the legislators will take it seriously, and let's see what happens at the federal level. But I think outside of what will happen from a privacy law perspective, clearly the industry is trying to self-regulate or bring new solutions and new innovation to the market, which is what Apple and I think Google and Amazon are trying to do right now.
Well, as always, Jacques, it was great to have you here. We could talk for hours about this, as I think I say every time we chat, but I really appreciate you being here.
It's my pleasure, Mark. Thank you so much.
Thanks to Jacques for being here. Always a thought-provoking discussion. Next time, we chat with my old buddy Kevin Flanagan about conversational marketing, so stay with us. This episode of Confessions of a Marketer was written, produced, and edited by yours truly. T. Jordan of A-Class Productions wrote the theme music. Confessions of a Marketer is a trademark of Reed Edwards Global Inc., and this episode is copyright 2018. I'm Mark Reed Edwards. See you next time.